Welcome to this, our workshop, introducing visual science communication. I'm Peter, I'm from InfoHackit, a consulting company based in Norwich, and I'm working on this project with the Youth STEMM Award and the Darwin Tree of Life project, for whose funding we are very grateful. Let's move this along. As I was preparing this talk for you guys, I wanted to think back about when I was in your position, when I was in year 12, which was quite a long time ago now. What was I doing and what did I know about visual science communication? Well, I've got this image for you. Now, I didn't draw this. This is from a test paper for the Royal Geographical Society, which I've indicated here in the bottom left. But this was my favourite part of my A-levels. I did A-level geography and I absolutely loved drawing pictures of rivers and field sites and scientific diagrams. Now, at that point, I had absolutely no idea that it was possible to do that for a job. Nobody told me that that was possible, which is completely fair. I guess a lot of people didn't know that it was possible either. But now looking back with my future career, it makes quite a lot of sense where I started out and what I like doing. I'd be there in I remember clearly my A-level exams, sat in the school hall at the little desk, with pieces of paper in front of me, getting all the writing done as quickly as possible, and then getting my colouring pencils out and having a really, really good time illustrating the diagrams. So that was me. I would imagine some of you might be doing geography or doing a range of subjects if you're interested in the Youth STEM Awards and in science topics generally. So I hope you guys enjoy visualising your experiments and doing the little diagrams that you might have to do as part of your studies. And it is a really, really important skill to have. So what did I do after year 12? Well, I went to university and I went to study English and American literature at the University of East Anglia. I had a lovely time and I came out and I was fortunate enough to get a job in marketing, putting my English skills into good use. And I spent a little bit of time working for various different marketing companies, picked up lots of skills. And the one thing that I kept coming back to was design. I've always really enjoyed making posters and making graphics. Again, I learned how to do that on the job. I didn't do a specialist qualification or anything like that. But I then ended up specializing in a design role and becoming a professional graphic designer. And I did that then for quite a long time. I've had a 20-year career in what I would call information design. Now, what this means, terminology, lots of terminology today. But what this means is that I've spent most of my graphic design career designing complex information into different formats for people to distribute and understand. So, for example, I've worked a lot for the National Health Service, for different trusts, hospital trusts and community trusts within the NHS, designing things like patient information leaflets. So let's say you're having some treatment and you want a little bit of information about what happens when you receive the treatment. I've done a lot of that sort of thing. It's not very glamorous work, and I had to look at some really gross medical pictures from time to time, but it was really good, important work. I started working with research institutions and universities as well. And one of the things that I had to do very early in my design career was get a part-time job. I wasn't a very successful designer to begin with. So I had to get a part-time job. And my part-time job was reading UCAS forms at the University of East Anglia for their environmental sciences degree programs. Now, this is a really fun job. I would imagine that some of you are probably thinking about your UCAS forms and your personal statements and things like that already. Well, it was my job to read them and to process them through and make offers for students to come to university, which was a lovely thing to do. But what it did for me was it introduced me to lots and lots of environmental scientists. And I got talking to them about what their needs were, the kind of things that they had to visualize and design. And actually, my business pretty much started there. I was able to start working with environmental scientists and start helping them to visually communicate their work. So I've worked for a lot of people. I've worked for the European Commission, I've worked for UNESCO, lots of different universities, research institutions. However, by around 2015, I will finish the life story in a minute, I promise, but it is relevant. I was asked to start training researchers how to design things themselves. And I was highly skeptical about this. I didn't think it was a very good idea at all. I'd actually spent the 15 years or so previous to that trying to persuade scientists to pay me money to design things for them. But what I found in 2015 was that actually the scientists were really good at learning how to design things. Now, this is a big surprise to me. I didn't expect it, but PhD scientists and early career researchers and people like that tend to be very bright. They've got lots of wonderful qualifications, and actually their aptitude for design was really, really amazing. And I had a lovely time doing it as well. I really enjoyed working with scientists. So after this minor career revelation, after almost 20 years of running my own company, I gave up my day job as chief executive of a design agency and went instead to work training scientists how to design things. So it's a very niche job. There aren't many people that do this in the world. I'm one of only a handful that I know, literally 4 or 5 people that have this job, and I'm very lucky to have it. I work for myself, and I'm mainly employed by universities and research councils around the UK and in Europe to go around to different universities and also online to training scientists how to communicate their research. Now, my mission in this is quite modest. All I'm trying to do is to save the world. It's very, very easy for me to say that. And I will explain that later. What do I mean by saving the world? Can visual science communication save the world? Well, we shall see. I will answer that question later on. Now, in this workshop, we're going to be looking at some very important questions. First of all, we're going to talk about how scientists communicate. And scientists communicate quite a lot more than you might think. We're also going to talk about the kind of things that they might need to design to help them communicate. And also then a little bit about the kind of process of how those things actually get made. What do you need to enable you to make a poster or an animation or something like that? I'm also going to give you some insight into the teaching that I give to PhD students and researchers all around the country about visual science communication. We're going to cover a couple of little topics this afternoon before the end of the session. So hopefully you're going to learn something about design as well, because that is my absolute passion. And we're going to also talk to you about an opportunity of when you can get involved in visual science communication and a little project that you can try out to have a go, see what you think. So, important question number 1. Now, what do scientists do? Well, this definition is from the Science Council. A scientist is someone who systematically gathers and uses research and evidence to make hypotheses and test them to gain and share understanding and knowledge. So far, so good, right? Any of you doing science A-levels will be familiar with this kind of definition. And, you know, scientists might do this. They might work in a lab. I've just literally gone to an image site here with 3 images and typed in scientist and start to see the kind of things that come out. But this is the ultimate cliche. A scientist will be working in a lab, or if you like environmental sciences and geography and things like that, or ecology, you might be out there working in the field with a pair of binoculars, taking observations and making notes, doing all kinds of stuff. Or, you know, you might be writing equations on a board. These are all the kind of cliches that we understand about what scientists do. Writing research papers. Now, this is something that may or may not have crossed into your understanding by year 12, but scientists have to publish lots of research papers. So they're very often at their computer or with a pen and paper writing those research papers, which sum up the research that they've been doing and the data that they've collected and the insights that they've found from that information. But all of that requires communication. Communication is one of the most important things that a scientist can do. So a scientist can be the best lab worker, they can get the best results in the lab. If they don't tell anybody that they've done that, then that's a big problem for their research, because nothing changes. There's no progress made. They just have some results which are private to them, and they need to share this with the world and publish their findings, and then hopefully see what kind of difference the information that they've gathered might make out there in the big wide world as well. So scientists have to communicate all of the time. And importantly, This means scientists have to be designers too. Now, you might not expect this. If any of you have aspirations of being an academic scientist or a research scientist in a laboratory or something like that, you wouldn't necessarily think that graphic design was part of the job. So this is partly what I'm here to talk to you about today, because I didn't know this either. Even after years and years of working with these academics and researchers, the better I've got to know them, the more I found out about all of the visual information that they have to process. There's an awful lot of it. So let's ask ourselves, first of all, how do scientists communicate? That's important question number 2. In what ways do they communicate? And at the same time, we're going to cover important question number 3. What actually then needs designing? So let's see whether these kind of sound familiar or not, these different opportunities for communication. Scientists go to science festivals. Now, I hope some of you will have been to your local science festival, or maybe you've been to this one in Cheltenham. It's a very famous one. And science festivals really are a really great celebration of science and a fantastic opportunity to create things and visualize information. So you can see in this picture, we've got banners, we've got exhibition stands. If you're on that stand, you might be given a postcard with some information on it to keep. You might be given some stickers. I've been to lots of wonderful science festivals where there are posters up on the wall with lots of different scientific displays and lots of different things to learn. You might, if you've ever been to a science festival and this picture looks familiar, you might be given a bag with a load of information in it and leaflets and flyers, and you get to go around stands and collect all the different bits and pieces, sweets and pens and t-shirts and goodness knows what else is going into that bag by the end of the science festival day. So this really is a massive opportunity for scientists to design things and make things. Sometimes they'll pay somebody to do it themselves, but a lot of the time they'll be preparing those materials personally, and they'll have to actually sit down. And in the case of the stickers, they'll be finding somebody who manufactures stickers, and they'll be coming up with a design for the sticker and sending it off to that person and getting the stickers back, and hopefully they're happy with them. But none of these things are things that you would necessarily think that a scientist might have to do. Scientists also very often have to go to conferences. Conferences happen all the time, and there are lots of big scientific conferences around the world. Some of them are very general, very sort of broad topic areas of conference where the scientists in a particular discipline like biology or chemistry will meet up and have lots of meetings and discussions and go out for dinner and socialize with each other as well and get to know each other's research and see if there's anything useful for them that they can learn. It's a really big opportunity for academics to go to these. Now, some of them are very, very specific. So if you are an environmental scientist and maybe you're really into marine biogeochemistry or something like that, I deliberately just stuck loads of words together there. There's probably a conference for that somewhere in the world, maybe somewhere exciting like Hawaii, and you can go there and meet all of the scientists who are in your very, very narrow field and have some very productive discussions with them. But all of this also necessitates design. So very often, like this chap here, this is probably not a scientific conference. This looks more like a tech company or something like that, but you get the idea. We've got PowerPoint presentations. I'm sure you have to give PowerPoint presentations as part of your work at college as well. And importantly, we have to create research posters. So when you are a young scientist and you are doing a PhD, or maybe you're doing something like a postdoc, which would be the next opportunity for study that comes after a PhD, you're very often asked to design a poster. Now, it's not like a movie poster or a little poster that you'd see in the supermarket or something like that. They're very often very big. So if you know anything about paper sizes, we'd be talking about an A1 or an A0 piece of paper, very, very big, about a kind of meter wide or something like that. And on that poster, you have the opportunity to present your research. And the idea is you stand next to the poster and all the people at the conference wander around all the posters, looking at the information and talking to you about your research and what you've been up to and anything interesting that you want to tell them. So this is a very important part of a scientist's career. Here's some examples. I thought you might like to see what a research poster looks like. Now, most of the examples that I'm going to show you today are examples of posters and graphics designed by students that I've taught how to design. So I'm very proud of these. I think some of these are absolutely terrific. This is a poster by Holly, who is a PhD student at the University of Lancaster, and she studies pollinator biodiversity in solar parks. And you can see here, the first thing you notice is this wonderful little array of pollinators around the solar park, and this little green square. It's very inviting, very engaging. People want to go and look at it. In the middle section, we've got these top 10 techniques, which is a really nice kind of marketing technique, actually, to say, you're going to read this poster, but I'm going to divide it up into 10 easy chunks, like you might see on a social media article, or one of those kind of clickbaity, 10 movies to watch before you're 21 or something like that. I don't know. But we can go through those points one by one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and really digest the fairly complex information within this poster. So I think Holly's done a terrific job here. Here's another fantastic poster by Ali North, who's another one of my students, and she is lucky enough to study alpine newts. And just look at this wonderful illustration that she's created of this alpine newt. This is a real piece of artwork. Not all design has to be beautiful illustrations and things like that, but this is very engaging, isn't it? Look how that newt just pops out of the poster and engages you as an audience. There's a nice amount of text to go through, and she's really looking at a background. So that's kind of the contextual information that she's working in. She's showing you the current work that she's doing and the ideas that she would like to explore in future. So that's another terrific poster. This one's quite technical, isn't it? This is by another student of mine, Malta, who goes to Durham University. And I wanted to show you this one because this has got a lot more information in it. It's not all beautiful pictures of pollinators and newts and things like that. Some of them are very, very technical. And Malta has done some incredible illustrations here, which communicate structural inheritance. I'm not going to explain, it's all to do with tectonics and land and those kind of things. I'm not going to explain all the science to you now, that's not really the point, but there's a lot more text on here, a lot more to digest. You could imagine standing next to this poster, I hope, and digesting the information there and having a chat with Malta at the conference and seeing what he's been up to, and asking about this wonderful little data visualization in the middle here with this graph, and asking about these maps and these diagrams. And if you were of like mind with Malta and you were involved in this topic area, you would understand a lot more of this, and Malta will be able to communicate it to you. So 3 very different posters. I hope it gets across to you the idea of a scientific poster. It's to really just try and communicate your work succinctly, if possible, and in an engaging fashion using visual design. Terrific work. Okay, that was a long one, wasn't it? Let's talk about writing papers. So one of the other things that we said that scientists do is they sit and they write research articles and papers. And what this means is they've done a research project and they've got some results and they need to write them up and publish them in specialist magazines called scientific journals, where the information is being published there for other scientists to read and understand and review. So when they're doing this, they're putting together all of their lab results or fieldwork results or whatever they've done, and mostly it's words. There's about 4,500 words in the average kind of research paper, quite a long essay really. But we also need to visualize some of that data. Imagine that you've collected 10,000 data samples. It's very difficult to publish in a magazine all of that data all in one go and also ask people to interpret it. So we very often end up visualizing data in more efficient forms, like graphs and figures and diagrams, and also in something called visual abstract. So let's explore some examples here, as well as to the kind of things that we're talking about. This is a really lovely graph that was created by another one of my students, Mary Crossland, and she created this as part of a data visualization challenge, which actually happens every week on Twitter, where some data is given out and people have to visualize the data in different forms and then publish it to get feedback. And it's a wonderful way to explore how data can be exhibited visually, how we can show this very complex data, lots and lots of rows of information and tables, and create something which is easier for people to understand. So we'll go through this really, really quickly, but you can see here there are a number of threats to flowering plants globally. That's the title, very good. The threats are listed across the top, and we've got some data about 12 threats to global flowering plants, including things like climate change and pollution and those kind of terms. And down on the left side, we've got the continents. So we've got Africa, North America, South America, Asia, Oceania, and Europe. So what this enables us to do with this data is that we can compare and contrast, first of all, the different threats and how serious they are. We're looking at the size of the pink dots here. The pink dots represent extinctions. So we've got lots of different extinctions there happening, and these threats, the extinctions that have been blamed on these particular threats. So there's an awful lot going on. There's also a nice bit of storytelling in there, and storytelling is a weird kind of word to think about when we're talking about graphs and figures and data visualization. But if you are a good storyteller, it really helps, because graphs on their own can look very complicated and a little bit boring. What Mary's done here, which is really, really good, is she's highlighted, if you can see these with the dotted lines, she's highlighted 3 of the specific data points in this graph, and she's given them a little caption because she wanted to promote those 3 above the rest of the points on the graph. So she's done a little bit of what we would call editorializing there. She's made it easy for somebody looking at it to get to the heart of the story quickly. And also some very nice flower illustrations there as well. This is a figure, so rather than a graph, this is what we call a figure. It's not necessarily representing data, it's more explaining the nature of something or what something looks like. And I think this is absolutely beautiful piece of artwork. This is by a researcher called Madison, who was also part of my design program. And she created this absolutely beautiful figure about coral tissue and what the different layers of coral tissue look like when you really, really investigate them. And I think, you know, it communicates very well from a scientific point of view. We've got lots of different information there to understand the different scientific bits and pieces, but it's also really aesthetically pleasing, isn't it? It's just really nice to look at. I would be quite happy to frame this on my wall and look at it every day as a piece of art. I think it's absolutely great. This is more functional, but this is another example of a diagram that somebody might create to go along with a research paper. This one is by Peter Methley, who is a researcher at the University of Cambridge, and he works at the Sedgwick Museum sometimes. And this diagram is all about what happens to carbon dioxide in the oceans. And again, I'm not going to go through the science of this diagram necessarily, but I want you to look at this and try and gain some kind of critical appreciation of what's going on here. We've got the ocean, we've got the floor of the ocean, we've got various different chemical processes going on. And again, I think this is an absolutely terrifically engaging piece of work, which could be printed up as a lovely big poster in the museum or something like that for people to really understand what happens to this gas once it gets into the ocean. Now, this one more example, this is by Connor, who is another student that I work with. And this is a very specific type of graphic to do with a research paper. So we are still in the research paper theme here. This is called a visual abstract. Now, if you are lucky enough to go on and work in science, and if you were to write a research paper and somebody agreed to publish that research paper, this is very good goals for a scientist to have. If you get to that point, will anybody actually read the paper? That's a big question. I mean, a lot of people will get those magazines in and they'll read it cover to cover every time it comes in. But actually, scientists like Connor are working very hard to get people to actually read their paper that they've published in the first place. And this is a visual abstract. Now, what that means, strange words, isn't it? Visual abstract. An abstract in this particular circumstance means a summary. So it's a visual summary of the entire research paper. And Connor would have published this visual abstract on Twitter. And the idea is he would send it out in a tweet as a graphic to really engage people in his research. And as part of the tweet, there would be a link for people to go and read the paper. So what he's trying to do is increase the engagement in his paper, get more people to read it. The other thing that scientists really want people to do when they read their paper is they would like them cited. So they want other people to quote their research paper in their own research. That's really, really important because it shows that your research is important and influential, and all of those things have a very good effect on you as a scientist as you go through your career. So Connor is trying to generate interest in his paper. It's like a poster, it's like a marketing plan for his research paper. And hopefully people will go and read it and enjoy it and use it and reward Connor for his efforts. That's the idea anyway. We're still in types of communication. We're doing very well. Keep an eye on the time. Also, scientists like to broadcast information. So we communicate in film and animation and podcasts and radio. There are some brilliant science podcasts. Brilliant. I really like listening to some of the science programs on Radio 4, and I can recommend things like the Infinite Monkey Cage and programs like that. And also people are making documentaries. We have this professor at UEA, Ben Garrett, who has been making documentaries for the BBC, and people like David Attenborough, of course, and the really, really kind of famous people communicating science via film and animation. But scientists also, as well as being on programs for the BBC or for Channel 4 or Sky or Netflix or whoever, it's very much more complicated these days, they also make these things themselves. They will literally take a video camera out into the field, make some films, put them online, get people to watch them. They'll make their own podcasts. And we had the pleasure of running a very special training program with a group of scientists recently who were all interested in animation. And I worked with a professional animator, and the scientists worked with me as well to create these incredible visuals. And I want to show you one of the films that was made. And I want to, before I hit play, I want you to think, this video was not created by a professional animator or a filmmaker. This was created by a research scientist. So here we go.
What is geodiversity? And why is it important to biodiversity? Geodiversity refers to the variety of non-living features and processes in the natural environment. It includes geology, such as rocks and minerals, geomorphology, that is the topography and landforms that are present, hydrology, such as the presence of lakes, rivers, ponds, and springs, and also the texture and mineralogy of soils present in the landscape. But how does this affect biodiversity? The variety of non-living features and processes in a landscape can have a major influence on habitat diversity. A landscape that is geodiverse can provide a variety of habitats and niche space for species to exploit. This can result in a greater species diversity than a landscape that is less geodiverse, which may have fewer habitats and support a lower number of species. These landscapes may still be important for biodiversity, however. For example, by providing a habitat for a rare plant species that grows on an uncommon rock type. Scientists are currently researching how these geodiversity-biodiversity relationships work, and if geodiversity could play an important role in helping to conserve rare species and habitats.
I want to applaud that film every time I see it, but Lucy there has done such a terrific job. What she's had to do is she's had to do the science, first of all. She's had to think about how to communicate that science in an animation. She's learned to draw using software, and then she has also learned to animate on top of all of those things to produce her own film. So a lot of hard work went into that, but yes, Lucy is a scientist. So those are the different, I mean, it's not an extensive list of all the ways in which scientists communicate, but it gets you through quite a lot of them. So it brings me on to important question number 4. What do you need to be able to do to communicate? There are some raw materials that you need to be able to put one of these things together. So if Lucy didn't have her research, she wouldn't have a topic for her animation. So the first thing that you need is content. You need something to say. Now, scientists are brilliant at this because scientists are literally constantly generating content. That's what they do. They are doing their research. They are publishing their findings. They always have something to say. They always have something to communicate to someone for some purpose. So actually, this is one of the reasons why it's so wonderful to work as a communicator with scientists, training them to design, because they always have excellent topics to work with. And I get to learn about all of these fantastic and fascinating different topics that my scientists are doing. Now, I touched on this a moment ago, but let's think about how difficult that process actually is of taking this very complex information and making it easy for people to understand. This is the word count of an average PhD thesis. So this is, if you're unaware of PhDs, they're normally a research project that take place over 3 years at the beginning of a scientist's career, when they've maybe done a BSc or maybe a master's or something like that as well. They might then go on to PhD. They will do 3 years work and they will write a thesis at the end of it, which is 100,000 words. That's a lot of words. That's kind of like writing a novel or something like that. They might then publish a journal article about what they've studied in their thesis. And at that point, they've got to take that 100,000 words and reduce it to 4. And that is a very difficult process to think for a moment about the other 96,000 words. Where are they going? Like, I'm sure those 96,000 words were important when they were written. So it's not just a case of editing things out, it's choosing what to leave in and what to publish in that 4,000 word journal article. When you publish a journal article, you have to produce a written abstract. There's that word again. You have to produce a written abstract of around 200 words. It differs, different publications, but you have to summarize, again, your 4,000 words down to 200. So you've got some very difficult decisions to make about what you're going to leave out and what you're going to leave in. With a visual abstract, like Connor's that we were looking at earlier with the lovely birds, you might only have room for about 50 words. Now, you do have pictures to help you as well, which goes a long way, believe me. But again, you have to go through this process of constantly prioritizing the most important things that you're going to say as part of your science communication. Because if I were to show you that visual abstract that Connor designed, you can understand that in about a minute. It's great. If I were to give you his 100,000 word thesis, it takes you a long time. It might then push at your motivation to actually bother to do that. You might give up 4,000 or 5,000 words in and think, oh, I'll just do something else instead. So this process of synthesizing this very complex information into these very sharp points of public communication is very, very difficult to do. One way that helps is by identifying your key messages. And very often scientists do find this quite tricky. So by key messages, what are the 2 or 3 most important things that you have to say as part of your science communication on this topic? Now, again, put yourself in that scientist's shoes. You spent 3 years writing 100,000 words on your topic, and then somebody like me, a communicator, comes along and says, what's the most important thing in that 100,000 words? What's the one thing that you would want people to understand from the last 3 years of your life that you would like to get across to them? So it's not easy, but it is necessary. So very often I'll ask people that question. I'll ask them the one most important thing, and very often they'll come up with a short list at that point and say, okay, right, we can work with that short list and we can promote your 3 key messages. The problem, of course, is that you can communicate more, but people run out of time. People don't have the appetite to consume all of the information. And if you emphasize every single point of what you have to do, then you end up emphasizing nothing. So this is a very important thing, to be able to pick through that complex information and take out the most important bits and use those to get people interested. So you're never throwing anything away. If you think about this triangle that we've just been talking about with 100,000 words at the bottom, working your way up to one fact about your research, nothing is being thrown in the bin. If you can excite somebody here at the top of this pyramid, then who knows? They might keep working their way down, all the way down to your 100,000 word thesis and read all of it. But those people will probably be in quite a small minority. What else do you need? Well, you need an audience. Now, scientists think very carefully, hopefully, about their audience, but there's a little temptation there. And if any of you guys are going to end up being scientists later on in your life or working in a science environment, there is a temptation to oversimplify the process of discovering your audience. Now, scientists very often take two very broad categories, scientists and non-scientists. Or you could put it a specialized audience or a non-specialized audience. As a marketeer, as somebody with a marketing career and experience, it's important to think more carefully about your target audience, who it is that you're trying to reach, what it is that you're trying to get them to do. So here's some examples of some audiences that you might have for your science communication. Young people, great. So we might have, primary school children, we might have high school children, we might have young adults going to university. If you think about yourself, if you have any younger siblings, you know that you're different to those little brothers or sisters. You know that you're not the same as them, and you don't think in the same way. So there are different distinctions to make there. An interesting point might be to say, well, I'm going to target my information towards people choosing their A-levels, and that's a great idea. So it's important to think carefully about the specifics of your audience. So another target audience might be consumers. So maybe you're doing some research on plant biology, on crop yields or something like that. Maybe you're doing something on climate change and you'd like people to change their buying habits. But again, you can think very specifically about the type of consumer. Which supermarket do they shop in? How much do they spend on their weekly shop? These are not necessarily questions that you can answer by yourself, but they are very interesting questions when it comes to communicating with those people. Policymakers, this is another very popular audience for science communication. Science informs policy at Westminster. And I have a picture of Michael Gove here because I have a story to tell you about a wonderful workshop that I ran a few years ago with some PhD scientists. And I asked them to think very specifically about their audience. And they said policy. I said, great. Which government? And they said, UK government. Fantastic. Which ministry? And they said, Department of Environment and Fisheries and all that. So great. Okay, fantastic. Which minister? And they said Michael Gove, who was at that time the Environment Secretary. So when they actually came to do their presentation at the end of the workshop, they designed a fantastic infographic. They actually put a chair in the middle of the room. And before they started their presentation, they said, we're going to present to Michael Gove. Michael Gove is sitting in this chair. And the presentation was absolutely fantastic. And it was targeted and it was strategic, specifically towards what they thought Michael Gove would want to know. And this is a great point of science communication. If you can identify that very small, that niche audience, the person that you're trying to reach, it really helps you make decisions about what you have to say, how you're going to say it, what kind of visuals you might create, all of those different things. You also need a mission. And that really comes on from what I was just saying. Sometimes we communicate just for the sake of it, and that's okay. But actually, within science, if you're doing some very important research, let's say on climate change, you want to make a difference to the world. You want your research to be important, and you want it to change something in the world or in society. And we call this concept impact. And impact is actually very important to scientists. They like to understand what happens next with their science once they've done it. How have they changed the world? What's different? So very often when you're doing science communication, it's a great idea to think about the change that you're trying to make in the world when you do that piece of science communication. So David Attenborough, for example, might be at the end of the program and do his kind of summing up. And very often when we'll be looking at these wonderful species, he'll talk about climate change and say, of course, all of these species are threatened, and all those kind of messages come across. So you're thinking about the objective, the reason why you are communicating. So let's go back to our target audiences and just think about that for a moment. Young people. So there we are. We talked about that. The mission here, if you're communicating with young people, might be to inspire them to study science A levels. This is really important. A lot of scientists spend a lot of time and money trying to engage people like you to get you to look and aspire to a career in science and train how to be a scientist, and help fill those important roles around the country, and to help keep science going and make sure that it stays very, very important to our country and to the world. So that's a really good mission for young people. Here's our consumers again. So a possible mission might be to encourage supermarket shoppers to swap a meat meal from their diet for a plant-based meal. And that has a really great effect on the carbon emissions of an individual's diet. So that might be a particular mission towards that target audience of consumers. And here's Michael Gove again, here we are. So the mission here might be to change the policy on air pollution. So you're making a recommendation perhaps on something that needs to change in the law to make air pollution better in the country. Wouldn't that be a wonderful piece of impact for your science if you could make that change? Now, obviously you've got to do the science to make that change, but actually a lot of the science, a lot of the impact comes from being able to communicate that science to the correct people at the right time in the right way. And that's hard to do, and it takes experience and skill and a lot of thought and ideas. Okay, we're doing very well. We're doing very well, okay. Just checking on my timing. This is a new session, so not exactly sure how long this is going to take. If you've got questions, we'll save them up until the end, and you're going to come and see me on the microphone once we stop the recording. But here's important question number 5. How can I learn more about visual communication? Well, the good news is I'm here. I'm one of the country's leading experts on visual communication for science communication. And design is an interesting thing. I wonder if any of you are doing any graphic design or art A levels amongst your sciences or anything like that. It's not necessarily something that people are always encouraged to do. And I wonder if any of you also think that you can draw or have any artistic ability. It's something that most young people have a kind of perception of in their life and carry it through into adulthood as well. And we hear unhelpful phrases like, you have to have an eye for design, or you have to have some kind of natural talent. And what people are talking about there is art, and art is not design. Anyone can improve their design work, anyone at all, because when you look at design, it is a balancing act. It's a balance of function and aesthetic. And I put these on the scale here so that you can see those things balancing out. So if you're not very artistic or creative, doesn't matter. You can improve your design and your visual communication through a better understanding of the function of design, thinking about all that stuff that we've been talking about, the content, the audience, the mission, thinking strategically about your communication, but also from a kind of maths and engineering point of view, making sure in your design work that you line things up, that you take care of the necessary technical knowledge that creates your design and makes it successful. So the way in which we do this is by realizing that we are in control and making good decisions. And what I mean by this is that if you've ever sat down to design a poster or something like that in PowerPoint, which might be something that you do for a school project, very often you're putting things down on the piece of paper in front of you, you're moving them around, up a bit, down a bit, left a bit, right a bit, make it a bit bigger, make it a bit smaller. And eventually it looks right. And the point at which it looks right is fascinating to me because it's different for everybody. But what I would like you to do is to think slightly more strategically. And I'm going to give you a few little insights here before the end of our talk about how this might work. So some technical pieces of information for you, almost about the science of design here. So color, first of all. There are two main colour systems, RGB, red, green and blue, and CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow and black. Now, let's explore what these are. RGB is how you are viewing me right now. Hello, I'm here in RGB, and you're looking at me in a mixture of light, red light, green light, blue light, mixing together in lots of different combinations to form the image that you're seeing on screen in front of you. With CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow and black, we're talking about print. So all of your textbooks at school, any magazines you read, any newspapers, posters that are printed out and put on the wall, the colours there are formed of a combination of these four ink colours, cyan, magenta, yellow and black. Now, they're very similar, but they're also very, very different. Imagine the physics of this, the difference between light and ink works in a very different way. With RGB, the higher the values, the more light, the brighter the colour gets. So if you look at my wall here, it's not very bright today, but there's probably a lot of RGB presenting my wall up there, and not a huge amount of RGB on my shirt, which is a little bit darker today. In print, the higher the values, the more ink we put onto a piece of paper, the darker the colour gets. So if you imagine mixing paints on an art palette or something like that, you mix them all together, you get a kind of dark brown kind of colour, don't you? And if you add some black in, it kind of becomes this really kind of rich black colour. That's how inks work as well. The more you add, the darker it gets. So let's have a look at this in practice briefly. Here is my breakfast cereal from this morning. Try this at home, but make sure you finish the cereal first. You can take the box apart and you can find these little colour registration marks at the bottom. What this means is that all of the visual information that you see on this cereal box is formed of a combination of cyan, magenta, yellow and black inks, all mixing together in different combinations. So here they are, like the paints on your palette. We've got this orange colour here, which has no cyan, lots of magenta, all of the yellow, these are percentages, and no black at all. And that's how we mix together colours in design. For images, I'm going to give you one little fact for each of these four: colour, images, type and composition. There are two main image types that we use in graphic design: rasters and vectors. Now, here's an example of a raster image. Here it comes. Raster images are pretty much photographs. When we look at a photograph and we zoom in, we can see all these tiny little pixels that make up the image, and each one of those pixels will have a colour reference in RGB or in CMYK, depending on the colour system that you're using, and it will make up the picture like a mosaic of Roman tiles to create the photograph in front of you. But we also have another type of image, and this is called a vector. And vectors are different. Vectors are made up of a series of geometric instructions. So this little kitten here, let's zoom in a little bit. We can see we've got some circles here. We've got a line which starts here, and there's a little equation which would define the gradient of this line going up here towards the nose. And we've got mathematical instructions for these shapes and how they're colored in and all those sorts of things. So vectors are very useful for things like diagrams, illustrations, logos, anything like that. When you're creating a poster in PowerPoint, if you've ever done that, you might bring in a photograph. That's a raster image. That's great. You might draw a rectangle or a circle as part of your design. That's a vector. That's a scalable vector. It's never pixelated. It always looks very, very nice, whatever size you print it, because with vector images, you can enlarge the images as much as you want to, and the quality always stays the same because the height and the width of the image are just variables within the equation that forms it. We'll talk about typography ever so briefly. It's a favorite topic of mine. The thing that most people think about when they think about fonts is they think about the type of font, whether it's Arial or Times or Comic Sans or something like that, and they think about the font size. So if you've done a school project, you might have recommendations given to you about font sizes and those sorts of things. But my main message to you today is that typography is about many other factors other than font choice and font size. So here we look at these three paragraphs. We've got a quote here written in three different ways. The different variables that we're talking about here are the line spacing, and we can see there's a big difference in line spacing between A and B. And if you look at C, you can see we've also got changes to the character spacing. Two different factors there to think about: line spacing and character spacing. Here's another slide, and we've got here the first 3 paragraphs of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and different factors here. We've got columns on side A, we've got different types of justification. So if you look at B, it's even on both sides, and on A, the paragraphs have this kind of jaggedy end on the right-hand side. There are different font sizes here as well. We've got bigger paragraph spacing on side A. Look at this. This is the gap between not the lines this time, but the paragraphs. So there's lots and lots of different factors to think about, and they all add up to whether or not somebody wants to read your text when they first look at it. If your typesetting is poor, and if your typography is poor, then it's more difficult for people to read. And if it's more difficult for people to read, the likelihood is they might give up, they might not retain as much information. So typography is very, very important to design, as well as colors and images. The last one is composition. This one's ever so quick. We'll just have a quick chat about this one. Composition is how all of those things come together, right? So if you think about a poster, there are colors, there are images, there's text, all kind of mixing together in different combinations to form a design. And very often, scientists are looking for the best design. They're looking for what we might call a silver bullet. They're looking for the template poster, which is perfect and will get them the best results. But I always argue it's a lot more like cake. Now, I like cake. I hope you like cake too. But it would be a shame, wouldn't it, if all cakes were identical? If all the cakes that we were ever given to eat were exactly the same, it would be very, very boring indeed. And actually, one of the most important things about composition is variety, because people get very bored of looking at the same thing. Imagine going to an academic conference. It's probably quite hard for you to imagine, but imagine you're there and there's 100 posters to look at in the room, and you're wandering around looking at each one of those posters, and they're all in the same design template. You would get very, very bored, and you'd be yawning by the 13th or 14th poster. But if there's some variety, it means that this poster is different from that one, and there's lots more interest, and you can have much more fun with it. So templates, bad. Custom design, good. And the other thing that you can do with composition is just look around you. Infographics, science visuals are everywhere. I don't know if you have any subscriptions at college for any science magazines or anything like that, but very often if you look at New Scientist, or you look in the daily newspapers, you will see graphs and figures and science graphics all over the place. So what I would advise you to do if you are interested in science communication is to start looking at those things. And when you look at them, think, this is good, or this is not good. And if you have an opinion, try and think why you think that. Try and establish what it is that you like about something, or what you don't like about something. And that critical appreciation of design will follow you around, and it will mean that when it comes time for you to do some design yourself, you'll have a much better idea of how you want to approach it. So the last question that we have today in this presentation is, when can I give it a try? I hope I've inspired you to think about science communication, and especially visual science communication today. When can I give it a try? And the spoiler, the answer to that question is not right now, but today, tomorrow, this week, this month. I have something to share with you. We have come up with a marvelous thing. We have a science communication challenge for you. And this document will be distributed to you. Bear with me, I'm just setting up a new share, which you should be able to see on your screen now. I'm just going to take you through this. So our challenge to you, me from InfoHackIt and the guys over at Youth STEMM Award, and our sponsors Darwin Tree of Life as well, we would like you to have a go at designing your own science communication poster. Now, I'll take you through the brief. You can have a read of it yourself later on when it's distributed. But the idea is to come up with an A3 poster, and you can use whatever software you like, whatever you're confident in. If it's a Word document, if it's PowerPoint, whatever you're used to using, don't worry about the technology. It'll be absolutely fine. It needs to be A3 though, so just check, what does A3 mean? Most PowerPoint and things like that, you'll be able to choose A3 and set up your poster that way. So the first step is to choose a species from the Darwin Tree of Life project. Now, I hope you're aware of Darwin Tree of Life. If you're not, you will be after this conversation. But there's a couple of links here that you can follow, which will take you to some lovely websites like this one, and this is the blog for Darwin Tree of Life, and you can have a look in here. It's all about genomics and different creatures and plants and fungi and things like that. You can go in here and find some inspiration, find a species that you're interested in. We've also got the genome notes, and I've given you links to both of these, so you can just pop through here and find a species that is covered by the project, and then find out some information about that creature too. So in here, for example, you can click on this peppered moth and it will take you through to a research paper with some exciting information about that moth. And if a research paper is too much for you, you can undertake your own research processes and find out your own information. Just make sure it's from a reputable source. I'm sure as A-level students, I don't need to tell you that. But make sure you know where your information is coming from and that it is valid. Returning to the brief. Here we are. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is to choose an audience. And I want you to get in practice here for your future science communication needs and pick a distinct audience. We've suggested 2. You can either create a poster which will appeal to your own peer group in year 12, or you can try and do a poster for a younger audience, maybe for a primary school class or something like that. So have a little think about who you think would benefit from the information that you've gathered and who you would like to communicate it to, and how that might affect your thinking about making that poster and the kind of information, the amount of information that you might include. All of those questions are really worth answering. So you've done that research, you can then plan your poster, and there's some tips there in terms of planning your poster and coming up with ideas for what to include in your poster and how to make those strategic decisions about what you're communicating. And all of that thinking will mean that when you get to that blank page in PowerPoint, say, and you've got to start designing something, you'll have a good idea of where to start. So all of that is right there for you in the document. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Only one thing to just talk about. There are a few things just to be aware of. So if you're using images from other sources, make sure that you please credit those. That would be absolutely great, because some of these posters are going to go on social media and things like that, and onto the Darwin Tree of Life website, and the Youth STEMM Award are going to publicise them as well once they've been created. So it would be good if you would please credit any images that we're going to use. Posters should be emailed to the Youth STEMM Awards, and there's an email address there for you. We don't have a deadline yet. We think it might be the end of term, but we might also give you a little bit longer. We've got some other groups to talk to, so we will come back to you on that particular aspect. And of course, if you are engaged on the Youth STEM Award at the moment, then your time working on the challenge will count towards your Youth STEM Award. So do bear that in mind, and you can have that reward as well. So good luck with your posters. I hope you will all have a go and enter our competition. There will be some judging and feedback and prizes and those sorts of things. Also to be confirmed. You're the first group we've talked to about it, but I look forward to seeing your work, and I hope that you will create some absolutely marvelous posters that I can admire and stick up on my wall. So let's, oh yeah, there's your awesome poster. There we are. So this is my first question. Can visual science communication save the world? Well, I think it can. I mean, if science is going to save the world, then communication is an important part of that. And getting those messages across to people and changing the world through the power of science communication is something that you guys can definitely do. Here, for example, is a project that I personally designed. There you go, some of my work for the European Commission. This was a project that I worked on communicating the impacts of climate change to policymakers within the European Commission. And what I hope is that the work that we did on this project will influence those policymakers to make necessary changes and help reduce climate change and ultimately save the world. So there you go, that's my bit done. Thank you very much, everybody. We will pause the recording now and we'll have a chance to have a chat with any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.